13 minutes after the hour now, President Obama is vowing to make 2016 a busy end to his 8 years in office. One of the first likely targets on his agenda, gun control. CNN senior White House correspondent Jim Acosta is traveling with the president in Hawaii.
Victor and Allison, during his vacation here in Hawaii, President Obama has been working with his top aides on his upcoming State of the Union address. The speech is expected to set an ambitious tone for what the president is vowing will be a busy end to his 8 years in office. And right at the top of the agenda is gun control. For President Obama, the final round is about to begin.
In 2016, I'm going to leave it out all on the field.
Up first in the president's 8th and last year in office, Mr. Obama's long-promised response to mass shootings in the U.S. Sources familiar with the plan say it will be a package of executive actions on gun control. Expected before the January 12th State of the Union and aimed at the gun show loophole, which allows some firearm sellers to avoid conducting background checks on their customers.
And all across America, survivors of gun violence and those who lost a child or a parent or a spouse to gun violence are forced to mark such awful anniversaries every single day. And yet Congress still hasn't done anything to prevent what happened to them from happening to other families.
The president will review the slate of administrative changes with Attorney General Loretta Lynch on Monday. The White House argues the president's actions will be within his executive authority and in line with polls that show broad support for tightening background checks.
Change as always is going to take all of us. The gun lobby is loud and well organized in its defense of effortlessly available guns for anyone. The rest of us are going to have to be just as passionate and well organized in our defense of our kids. That's the work of citizenship, to stand up and fight for the change that we seek.
Vowing to fight the move, the nation's biggest gun lobby, the NRA, says the president is doing what he always does when he doesn't get his way, defying the will of the people and using executive action. Another controversial proposal coming in the new year, the president will ask Congress to shut down the terror detention center at Guantanamo, a facility Mr. Obama may close on his own if lawmakers balk at the White House plan.
It'll be an uphill battle.
The president also hopes to travel to Cuba and perhaps more than a dozen other countries in what's shaping up to be a global farewell tour. But the president's agenda could be upended by setbacks in the war on ISIS. A foreign policy crisis that could complicate White House plans to have the president campaign heavily with the 2016 Democratic nominee, a prospect that may well put him and Hillary Clinton on the trail together again.
I think we will have a strong Democratic nominee. I think that Democratic nominee will win. I think I will have a Democratic successor.
But first, the president will lay out his plans for his final year in office at the fast-approaching State of the Union address, which is less than 2 weeks away. White House officials say don't expect a laundry list of proposals, in part because the president is almost out of time. Victor and Allison.
All right, Jim, thanks so much. CNN political commentators Errol Louis and Ben Ferguson join us now. Thank you both. And Errol, I want to start with you. It's been roughly 3 years since the president's full press that failed effort to get stricter gun laws enacted after Sandy Hook. Beyond this being the final year, why is this happening now? If this was such a priority, why is it happening 3 years after that initial push?
Well, the president, I think, has really never gotten over Sandy Hook. He said it was the worst day of his presidency. It's something that he's expressed enormous frustration about over the last 3 years. And so this would be his last opportunity. He's said to be meeting with the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, to sort of see how far he can go. It'll end up in court, I'm sure, regardless. You can expect the Supreme Court to end up ruling on this at some point down the road. But he wants to be able to say that he did everything that he could to prevent a repeat of that particular massacre and the others that have followed.
Yeah, that meeting happening on Monday with the Attorney General. Ben, now to you, and I want to put the numbers up on the screen if we have them, guys. The latest Quinnipiac poll released just before Christmas shows that 87% of registered Republicans support background checks for people who buy guns at gun shows or online. So as we talk about 2016 presidential politics, could this be a more difficult argument for GOP candidates to make against the president's proposed or potential executive order?
I don't think so, because a lot of gun owners, especially Republicans, understand that you can't micromanage, and it shouldn't be micromanaging down to the point where if I'm selling a gun to either my dad or my dad's giving me a family heirloom or grandfather, and that is where some of the Democrats have pushed this before. If you want to have some sort of comprehensive reform, the White House better be honest about what's actually in it, because when they claim they're doing this just to get rid of loopholes, that's not what they've been doing in the past. They've tried to ban guns, a large list of guns. And the other problem is this, is there's an issue of honesty on the White House agenda here. If they came out and would just be honest about it and say, look, we want extreme gun control, and that's what we're going for, that's one thing. But when you claim that somehow this executive action is going to make us safer or stop these mass shootings, the facts on the ground are absolutely the opposite of that. No one that has committed any of these crimes that the president is talking about with his executive action, the reason for doing it, would have been stopped by closing this loophole, as he puts it, in background checks at gun shows. None of these guns were purchased in that way that had any of these mass shootings or mass casualties. So when the president comes out and says this is about safety, there isn't one issue, one instance, I should say, where he can point and say, if we would have done this 3 years ago or 4 years ago or 5 years ago, Sandy Hook would have not happened. Aurora, Colorado would not have happened. This is about legacy building and trying to check a box going into this last year. This is not going to make the American people safer, and it would not have stopped any of these casualties that happen or any of these tragedies that happen.
I got you on that, but let me take you back to the question. If even 87% of registered Republicans would support stronger background checks for simply those buying guns at these shows or online, and that is something that he proposes, do you think that the Republican candidates for president can make that nuanced argument despite being at odds with their own voters?
Yeah, and the answer is yes, because it shouldn't be 50 guns in a year, as he's putting it, and the many Democrats saying, well, this should be a background check for every single gun that is going to be sold. Again, if I inherit multiple guns from my dad or my grandfather, if they pass away, or I want to give one to my brother or cousin, I shouldn't have to go get a gun dealer license. That is red tape, and most Republicans agree with that sentiment.
Errol, let me come to you.
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, let me just say real quickly. I mean, look, the house that I live in, I bought from my father. He had it for decades. And we had to do a quote-unquote background check. We had to do title searches and insurance and all of this kind of stuff. And yeah, it was a lot of red tape, and it was considered the right thing to do to make sure that that the ownership is recorded, that the public knows about it. And that's just a house that can't hurt anybody. It's not really an extreme measure to suggest that maybe we should do that with a deadly firearm.
Errol, is this something that the Clinton campaign welcomes?
I don't think so. I mean, look, the reality is there is this disparity. You've got that 87% figure that you just mentioned, but then if you go and look at who those same Republican voters are voting for, are sending to Congress, or sending to their state house, it's people with very different views about gun control. So the voters are, in some ways, look, guns end up being something like a metaphor. That it means freedom to people. It means independence. It means protection for their family. It doesn't get into the weeds of whether or not this is going to hurt some kids somewhere else, whether or not this might lead to some massacre. And let's keep in mind that we're not just talking about Sandy Hook-type massacres or Aurora, Colorado-type massacres. There's this deadly daily drumbeat in Chicago, in Philadelphia, in New York City, where 3 people are killed, 4 people are killed, where there's all of this gunplay, and that a lot of those guns are, in fact, trickling through these gun show loopholes and making their way up into the cities.
With all due respect,
that too is part of what the president wants to try and stop.
We got 10 seconds, Ben. 10 seconds.
The facts do not back up what you just said. The guns are being used in killing people day in and day out in Chicago are not coming from a loophole at gun shows. That's just, the facts do not back that up. And officials, law enforcement officials, including the FBI statistics, say that is absolutely incorrect. There's illegal guns on the streets that have nothing to do with law-abiding citizens going through background checks.
And those are not the guns. The NRA and the Congress have seen to it that we don't even track where the guns come from. So, I mean, that's part of the problem, too, and we can expect the president to talk about that.
Got to end it there. We know that meeting will happen with the Attorney General on Monday, and we'll see what this, as it's being called, imminent executive order will detail. Thank you both. Errol, Ben, we'll see you next hour.
Happy New Year.
To you too. Allison?
Okay, coming up.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.